You ever walk out of a hardware store with a $200 budget TIG welder, only to discover a week later that the machine can't hold a steady arc on thin aluminum, or that you spend an entire afternoon chasing a stubborn error code? I've seen a lot of people regret that shortcut, and it's a reminder that with welding gear you're not just buying metal-to-metal bonding, you are buying confidence that the job will finish without a second guess. That's why I wanted to take a closer look at the Miller Syncrowave 212 AC/DC, a unit that promises auto-set, a user-friendly LCD, and a cooler that can handle both TIG and spool gun work. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the biggest hesitation people have with a mid-range welder is whether the price gap between a cheap entry model and a brand-name machine is really worth it. The cheap alternatives often skip the very things that make welding predictable: a solid arc start, consistent pulse control, and an interface that tells you what's happening instead of guessing. The Syncrowave 212 tries to bridge that gap by automating the setup steps most newcomers dread. When you power it up, the LCD walks you through selecting the material, thickness, and shielding gas, then it automatically tunes the amperage, frequency, and balance. In a real shop, that means you can drop a new piece of sheet metal onto the table, dial in mild steel 1 mm, and let the machine do the fine-tuning while you focus on the torch angle. I tested that workflow on a small fabrication bench where I'm building a custom bike frame. Normally, I'd spend 10 to 15 minutes tweaking the knob settings, watching the arc length, and adjusting the foot pedal response. With the Syncrowave, the auto-set routine took less than a minute. The machine displayed the exact voltage and amperage it settled on, and the arc stayed steady even as I moved from a flat plate to a curved tube. For a hobbyist who doesn't want to spend evenings reading manuals, that speed feels like a genuine time saver. It also reduces the trial and error frustration that can make new welders quit before they even finish their first project. The LCD interface isn't just a menu, it's a practical guide. It shows a small graph of the pulse cycle when you enable pulsed TIG, which is a feature you rarely see in this price range. I used the pulsed mode to weld thin stainless steel brackets for a marine application. The pulse helped control heat input, preventing the metal from warping. The screen also warns you if the machine gets too hot, which dovetails nicely with the cooler-friendly design. Unlike some cheap welders that overheat after 15 minutes of continuous use, the Syncrowave kept its temperature in the green zone during a half-hour of non-stop TIG on stainless. That reliability matters when you're on a job site with a tight deadline. Now, who should actually consider buying this machine? If you're a serious DIYer, a small shop owner, or an apprenticeship program that needs a versatile welder without breaking the bank, the Syncrowave hits a sweet spot. It can handle AC for aluminum, DC for steel, and even run a spool gun for a MIG-style feeding, so you're not forced into buying a second machine for different metals. The cooler and spool gun compatible claim isn't just marketing fluff. I hooked up a standard Miller spool gun and ran a 3/32 inch copper pipe weld. The arc stayed clean, and the machine never sounded like it was struggling. For anyone who needs the flexibility to switch between thin-walled aluminum and thick steel plates without swapping equipment, this is a solid reason to buy. On the flip side, if you're a professional fabricator whose daily output runs into multiple hundred feet of weld per day, you might still look at higher-end models that offer more robust duty cycles and deeper programmable memory slots. The Syncrowave's duty cycle is respectable for its class, but it's not unlimited. You'll still need to pause every 20-30 minutes on a long run to let it cool. Also, the machine's power input is limited to 120 V, which means you won't get the same penetration depth on heavy-gauge steel as you would with a 3-phase 240 V unit. So for a high-volume production environment, the value proposition shifts. One hidden trade-off I noticed is the weight and portability. At about 45 pounds, the Syncrowave is lighter than many comparable MIG/TIG combos, which makes it easy to cart around a small shop or load into a van for field work. However, that portability comes with a slightly smaller transformer, and while the machine stays cool during moderate use, pushing it to its maximum amperage on thick aluminum will cause the fan to run louder than you might expect. In a quiet hobby shop, that's a minor annoyance, but on a residential property with close neighbors it could be a consideration. Another practical point is the learning curve. The auto set is a lifesaver for beginners, but seasoned welders often prefer the tactile feel of manual knobs to fine-tune the waveform. The Syncrowave does let you override the automatic parameters, but